All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Martina Lauchengco. I'm an operating partner at Costanoa Ventures. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for coming and making the time for us tonight. When we first sent out the emails for this event, it was like 4 o'clock or so on Monday, and it was one of those things where like, well, you know, we think this is a good idea, but we don't know who's going to come to our party. So we send it out, and just for kicks, about 6 o'clock that night, I opened up the Eventbrite dashboard, and I was like, oh, look, 20 people RSVP'd, yes, excellent. And then the next morning I checked again, I was like, oh, wow, 60-something people have RSVP'd. And before that afternoon came around, we had already sold out. So we were thrilled. We're like, well, let's see what happens. By the end of the week, we had over 200 people saying they wanted to be here. So we started emailing our panelists. Do you guys have bigger spaces at your companies? Rachel was asking her sister. Pamela was looking at places that she looked at, trying to find places where we could accommodate all of you to be part of this conversation versus just experiencing it virtually. So we do want to thank you for taking the time to actually be a butt in a seat so that we could have this conversation in real time and live. So some of you might be wondering, why is a small venture firm that I probably hadn't heard of hosting this event? Costanoa invests in early stage startups that change how business gets done. And part of that is not just changing the technology and security infrastructure that changes businesses, but it's changing the people who run businesses, who lead them, and who come up with those ideas. And it's part of our daily lives that we talk to candidates all the time, and we just want there to be more diversity in that candidate pool, because we know that all of us benefit from companies having more diversity in who runs and leads them. So that's why we're here. Our goal tonight is to help empower and inspire you to be part of what creates that change, because it's not just about the conversations we have in this room tonight, it's about what all of us choose to do when we leave. But before I introduce our amazing panel and we get to share all their wonderful insights, we'd actually like to get to know you guys a little bit more. So this is the audience participation part of the evening. And here's how it works. I'm going to make a statement, and if you agree with it, please stand, look around the room, see who's with you in on this, and then sit back down. So very simple. All right, easy first question. I get enough sleep. Stand if you agree. Oh, good for you. Your bodies thank you. Next question. I exercise as much as I'd like to. Oh, good. Again, your bodies thank you. You will live long and prosper. Next question. I'm an introvert. Beautiful. Thank you for standing. Next question. I'm a person of color. Next question. I have a technical degree. Cool. Go STEM. Next question. I believe there is a bias towards technical degrees in Silicon Valley. Yeah, we all feel it. Especially those of us that did not stand up that part of it. Next question. I have immigrant parents. Cool. Super cool. Next question. English is my second language. Wow. I wonder how many countries and languages we have represented tonight. All right. Who is a first-line manager? Please stand. Excellent. They're your people. I am a director or second-level manager. I am a VP. Awesome. You go, sisters. I am a C-suite executive or board member. All right. So this is our work. Next question. I have a supportive partner who enables my career. We are all very lucky. Or all of you standing are very lucky. Next question. I was promoted without having to advocate for it. Awesome. Consider yourselves lucky. I have children. Excellent. The next generation. Next question. I feel like I've been treated unfairly because of people's biases and assumptions. Hopefully we'll talk more about that tonight. These are softball questions. I am from the West Coast. Okay. I'm from the East Coast. Our whole panel? Oh my God! I did not know that. I'm from the Midwest. I am from the South. Yay! I'm from abroad. Wasn't born here. And this one you can all do from your seats. Exercise section is over. Make a loud noise if you are glad to be here tonight. Awesome. Well, part of that was just to see and feel what the power of this room is like. And those were all of your voices united as one. And just imagine if all of us apply that to anything that we want to change, the kind of power that we can have. So with that, I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists. Annie, we'll start with you, who's right next to me, is in global strategy and planning as a senior associate at Uber, which means that she collaborates with top operational, marketing, and strategy executives to solve tough problems, which means she's busy all the time. But before Uber, she was a senior associate at Bain, and she got her BA in HumBio at Stanford University and her master's in science and engineering, also from Stanford. And next we have Lauren Mullenholtz, who's a global director of insights at LinkedIn, which basically means she's using all the data at LinkedIn to help steer their roadmap and provide insights to sales organizations. She started 4 years ago in product marketing at LinkedIn and launched the Sales Navigator product. But before that, she sharpened all of her product, marketing, and analytical skills in various roles in marketing and other things at Apple and the Washington Post. And next to her, I have a confession. I met Sarah on the very first day I started my career at Microsoft. So we had offices next to each other. Yeah, 3 years ago, exactly. But she's now the highfalutin co-founder and vice president of marketing operations at Nextdoor. All right, Nextdoor's in the house. She started her career as a product manager at Microsoft, obviously, and for some reason decided to go to Harvard Business School. We couldn't understand. But after that, became an associate at Greylock. And from there, she joined ePinions as a VP of product and marketing before it became shopping.com and went public, and before it was acquired by eBay. She was an EIR at Benchmark, and that's where she founded with a company that preceded Nextdoor. And then next to her, we have Selina Tobaccowala, who's a co-founder of Gixo, and is currently on the board of Redfin and the advisory board of HubSpot, and was the former president and CTO at SurveyMonkey, where she also served as the president of engineering and product. And before that, she was the SVP of product and technology at Ticketmaster's European division, and was the VP of online product and technology and entertainment publications. And prior to that, founded a little company called Evite that was eventually sold to Ticketmaster. So they are all master slackers and amazing. And we're very, very grateful for all of them being here tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So we're going to start with what is probably not an elephant in the room, but how can we not talk about it? If you've read the Wall Street Journal, you might have seen the article about Facebook and the bias around of women engineers. You might have seen the cover story on Atlantic about why Silicon Valley is so awful to women. Or you might have heard about some things that were happening over at Uber. Well, my question for all of you is, as you guys either live through this or hear about this and experience it, what are your reactions? And what do you do personally, or what do you work with your companies to help prevent your own companies or groups from falling into some of those traps? Why don't we start with Annie?
Sure. So yeah, I've been at Uber for almost a year, and certainly the last 3 or 4 months have been really interesting and some turbulent times, but I've definitely learned a lot. And I would say my biggest learning over the past few months has just been you really don't need to, and you shouldn't wait until you have a burning platform to tackle some of these issues and to think about these things. I think we are now really starting to dive deep to understand the issues that we have and try and understand what we can do about them. But I would say as a takeaway for all of you, after tonight, think about even in your own companies, whether you think it's a huge problem or whether it's something you think you do really well. Just think about what you can do, the impact that you can have at your company to make it a better, more equitable place to work. Because I know we're doing a lot of that work now at Uber. But my hope is that for other companies, you can learn from some of the struggles that we've had and kind of get ahead of it at your company. But for me personally, it's been really interesting and very empowering to be able to think about some of these issues and dive super deep on them myself, where we're a company of more than 13,000 people now. But the ability to feel like I'm actually involved in some of the conversations around how do we improve the way we do performance reviews, how do we think about promotions, how do we think about manager training. And so it's been a wonderful thing to be a part of, despite the challenges that we've heard about in the news.
Selina?
So I'd say that one of the most important things, especially if you're starting a company, is starting with diversity right up front. And trying to make sure that you're making those conscious decisions. Because when you think about hiring other people, you are more likely, there is that inevitable cycle where you're hiring people that are similar to you. And so the more diversity you bring in that early stages of the company, the more likely you're going to be able to keep that up. I would say if you are at a company and it's not diverse, I think you need to really look at and say, is there a true commitment to make that change if it's important to you? Like, are there women and people of color on the executive team? Are there women and people of color on the board? I mean, these are things that if they're important to the CEO and they're important to leadership, they will make happen. And so, if you don't feel like you can make change and it's important to you, there's a lot of companies out there and you're in control of your own destiny. So,
Lauren?
I would say the news generally has been really disappointing to see. I think one of the things that I want to do is not feel like it's such an overwhelming problem that it's hopeless. And I found a lot of hope and action in LinkedIn, my company, around this topic. And I've had the benefit actually of the evolution that I think Uber has gone through happening a little bit earlier before my time, especially entering into leadership roles, where one of the heads of our business and our executive team had an event where he basically didn't realize at all that it was all white men speaking at the event. The entire thing for a day and a half was all white men. And one of the women, who was a little bit more senior at the time, went up to him and said, "Hey, did you notice this?" And he was like, "No, what are you talking about? That's just like the leadership team." And she was like, "Exactly. That's exactly the point." And pointed out this unconscious bias, and it really hit him. And since that moment, he's really made it a huge initiative across the executive team and at the company to really focus on this and bring this unconscious bias and this conversation to light, which I think has been really helpful. The leading from the front and really making it a priority at the company. And the two ways in which we've attacked it, and I'm not trying to say it's perfect, but two ways that I've seen it be really effective to attack it is hiring. So making sure that you've got diverse panels, whether it's underrepresented minorities or women on the panels. So that's a really important thing. A lot of times we circulate the same talent between the tech companies, and we know our numbers aren't where they need to be. So thinking about hiring talent differently is definitely a focus, and then also investing in people, particularly women, to help them get through the leadership ranks and learn the skills and the things that they need to be successful. I think those have been the two things that I've seen most meaningfully change the environment at LinkedIn and where we've started to make progress.
So I think there's been a change in the last, call it 8-7 years, where this is now a topic of conversation. I think for a span of 10 or 15 years in the beginning of my career, it wasn't something that people really talked about. And I think that, obviously the work that Sheryl Sandberg did in writing Lean In just brought that to the forefront. And the conversation has continued because many of us care about this. And it comes from all corners. And so it's no longer a taboo topic to bring up. And I think that helps quite a bit. I'm a big fan, similar to Selina, about really thinking about getting folks in the beginning of the creation of companies such that it's part of the DNA that you have diverse leadership. 2 of the 7 co-founders of Nextdoor were women. I think part of it is reflected in our product and how we think about it. I remember having conversations about the importance of privacy, and I looked at that issue in a very specific way that my male colleagues looked at differently, and we were able to have a conversation about how I thought about privacy and representing what has ended up being even more than 50% of our members. So that was really important. I think the other piece of it is that we have a responsibility as women in the industry to make an effort to be mentors to younger people younger women who are coming along. You see this happen all the time amongst men. Some people will call it the old boys network. I jokingly call it, we have an old girls network. But it's really making an effort with younger people who are coming into the industry and going a little bit out of the way to make them feel comfortable, sometimes to make them feel a little uncomfortable and push them, give them the feedback about how maybe they are behaving or presenting themselves in a larger group meeting. And hey, here's a little tip, think about how you present yourself. And so it's something that, it's not a formal thing that I do, but it's something that I like to bring to what I do at Nextdoor. It's part of what I enjoy doing, right? Is trying to help along the way. And Martina, you and I both were lucky to be around some very strong, talented women at Microsoft that went out of their way to reach out and push us. And they weren't always telling us what we wanted to hear. Sometimes they were pushing us to expect even more from ourselves. And I've been forever grateful for that, and I like to try and think about paying that forward.
So you brought up a couple of really important things there. One is advice that was sometimes hard to hear. Another was advocates, so I want to get to both of those things. So what is some advice that, I'll give you an example so some of that Sarah knows. I had a 30-page in-depth competitive analysis, and I thought it was great, and I turned it into my boss to review, and he wrote back in all caps, "Needs more bullets if you want it to be read." And that turned out to be really important, valuable, career-long advice that I hated hearing at the time. But what is advice that you've gotten along your career that might have been hard to hear at the time that in retrospect served you really well? Or what is some advice that you wish your first-time manager self knew at that time? So as a laugh there, Selina, so we're going to start with you.
I think for me, some of the biggest advice, again, thinking about what I would tell myself, was that as a manager, especially I feel like as a young female manager, you're managing in technology generally, mostly men, you're a little reticent to cut low performers. And that was something that I took a lot longer to do. And looking back, it's you want to be generous and you want to give people feedback, but there's never a time you look back and say, wow, I wish I let that person stay here longer, versus, you look and you say, oh my goodness, what a performance improvement, or the team is better off because I let that person go. And that's something that I found very difficult early on in my career. And it's that balance of you want to be kind and you want to take care of people, but keeping someone on your team who's not performing isn't being kind to them either. And it took me too long to, I think, realize that in my career. And that's the thing I would definitely go back and tell myself.
I think I totally agree on that, whether it's firing or laying people off and making hard decisions. And what I've learned over time is that, yes, it's better for the team, it's better for the organization. It is way better for the individual.
Yeah.
And I'll get to a point where I say, this isn't working out, this isn't a match.
Absolutely.
And you need to be set free so you can go find the thing that is a good match, and I will help you. And I think kind of at a meta level, I remember being a first-time manager and having to make some hard decisions, and there was a little bit of how do you handle it? Right? And I'll never forget the first round of layoffs that I had to go through, and we were laying off 25 people in a company of 100. And if any of you know, a gentleman by the name of Bill Campbell was on our board, and many considered him to be the coach of Silicon Valley. And we were sitting there with a whole bunch of VCs that were early in their career who were saying, we got to lay these people off and escort them to the door and lock down their computers. And we're all like writing this down because it's the first time that we would go through it. And I'll never forget, Bill Campbell just shot up and he said, absolutely not. And if you know Bill Campbell, there was an F-bomb somewhere in there. But he was like, look, treat people the way that you would want to be treated. You treat them like adults, they will behave like adults. These people have done nothing wrong. The failure here is a failure of management, of overhiring and overspending, and these people have to go home to their families and explain to them why they don't have a job. And it just reminded me that be human. And I think sometimes when you're a first-time manager, you think you gotta be the manager and you gotta do things kind of by the book, and trust your gut a bit there, and just think about having the empathy for the person on the other side, and you'll tend to make pretty good judgment calls along the way.
I would say,
Go ahead, Lauren.
along those lines, the striving for perfection, especially as a first-time manager, is a trap that I see people fall into all the time. So, you know, in addition to, you know, maybe not cutting the cord soon enough, definitely the expectation that I need to be perfect, or, you know, I can't stumble, or I'm failing. Things like that. I mean, I think it's inevitable as you go through a transformative experience, as you move up the ranks, that you're going to have stumbles. And just setting the expectation around like perfection not being the goal. And it's really about resilience. It's really about what you learn. It's really about how you grow. And then giving people, especially first-time managers, the empathy around that, and coaching to teach them, you know, where the pitfalls are along the way, but then definitely not setting the expectation of perfection, I think is important for yourself as you move into new roles, and also for those that you manage.
So Annie, you're our first-time manager.
So actually, my best advice that I received that I think is useful for everyone just starting out, but even beyond that, looking to the next level, would be always have an opinion. So for me, that means, you know, it doesn't mean always exercise that opinion and feel like you have to weigh in on every topic. But I think hearing early on that even if there's a discussion going on with people that you feel are far more senior than you, and you're in a room and you don't feel like it is your decision to make, or it's a topic that you should necessarily be weighing in on, always force yourself to think about what would I do if I were the decision maker in that situation, and always think about what you know, whether it's your manager or your manager's manager or the CEO of the company at every level. Try and craft your own opinion on whatever it is that's going on, because that will help prepare you for when you do get promoted and you do kind of rise in the ranks in your organization. You'll have exercised that muscle to be thinking kind of beyond your current role. And I think that's been hugely valuable for me in thinking about growing in my career, and is something that's never too early to start thinking about.
That is excellent advice for sure. Learn to flex the muscle before you need to use it. So Sarah, you brought up earlier advocacy and having advocates. Can you guys share stories about someone that has been an advocate for you? And just so that we're all speaking the same language, an advocate is someone who is ahead of you in their career and explicitly sort of tries to pull you up and along on the career ladder. So had an advocate that actually had tremendous influence on you, and has it changed what you do as a result of them being your advocate? So we'll start with Lauren, since you're nodding your head.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest learnings that I've had over the past couple of years, thanks to an advocate that I was extremely lucky to have. So the person that pulled me over to the Insights team that I now lead, the former leader of the team, he was someone who I had worked with as a partner and just saw some potential in me. And you know, he convinced me to come over and manage a team at LinkedIn for the first time. I'd done it in the past. And he just consistently believed in me. And I know how many conversations just, you know, after the fact, but he never told me, that he ended up having when I wasn't in the room, about the things that I was doing, about the things that I was leading, about my potential for his role. Really the fact that he was grooming me and coaching me along the way and giving me at-bats at that. And he was constantly seeding his conversations with the leadership team, with the other people who would ultimately end up making the decision whether or not I was to take his job. And the whole time he was advocating for me, pushing me, you know, teaching me, coaching me, and advocating for me. And he was creating other advocates with his advocacy. So there are many advocates I now have because this one person decided to go to bat for me when I wasn't in the room. And he's since left the company, but that advocacy I don't know, contagion, I guess, has continued to be a huge benefit. And what has changed about how I do things is I never realized how important that is. And using your kind of own position to help other folks on your team, and in particular women, especially if they have a confidence gap and you think they're amazing, really just leaning in and advocating for those folks, convincing them about their own worth, but also making sure that you're telling everybody else how great they are. It's something that I'm super passionate about, seeing how much it's impacted me.
Sarah, you're nodding.
Look, I got very lucky at Microsoft, and many of them were people that we shared, but there was an early VP, Robbie Bach, who was really 2 levels up from me, who I got a chance to work with him on a couple projects. And it included traveling around the country and talking to press people. And we just clicked. And from that point on, he became a great advocate for me, and really tried to open up opportunities for me. And I just think you're going to get opportunities that don't feel like automatic mentorship. It's not this like, you know, hey, will you be my mentor, right? Like, you'll get these opportunities where you get an opportunity to work with someone different, and they get to see you in action, and they're going to decide whether or not they want to be an advocate for you. I think the other person who's been an advocate, it's a little bit counter to the way you were setting it up, has been my co-founder, Nirav Tolia. And really, he was someone who had started a company before, had led a company, and when I had left eBay after the sale of shopping.com, he was the one who said, come do this with me. And I felt so fortunate to have someone who had been through the process before bring me along. He was part of the reason why I ended up at Benchmark as an entrepreneur in residence, and I'm grateful for that opportunity.
Selina?
I mean, I've had many advocates and mentors in my career, and I think that as you go along, you'll meet those people, like Sarah was saying, and it's making sure that you're taking advantage of those opportunities. But I would probably be remiss without mentioning Dave Goldberg, who is the CEO of SurveyMonkey, and taught me more than I could ever imagine or discuss in 2 minutes. But I would say that one of the biggest things that he taught me was, again, continuing to push yourself in new ways of your own learning. So, I mean, he said to me one day, he said, you need to get on a board. And I was like, okay. And it was hard to imagine at the time what that was, you know, like, what advantage am I going to learn by being on a board? But it was him pushing me to say, this is what you need to do to get to your next step. And for me, it turned out to be great. Like, I'm somebody who's extremely detail-oriented, and what being on a board taught me was you have to be able to make decisions with both imperfect data, and that you're trusting the people, you know, in that case, the executive team, and you're checking, do they have the right resources to do their job? And I brought that back to SurveyMonkey, where I said, okay, you know, you need to make sure you're empowering your team completely for them to be effective, and that what you're looking at with the team is, do they have what they need to be successful? But it was, you know, with Dave, I mean, like I said, he taught me how to build a great culture. He taught me how to think about problems in new ways. But the part that, from an advocacy perspective, that when you find somebody who's pushing on you to say you can do more, or think about ways you can do more, here's how you can do more, and is willing to push on you, it's that, to me, is the most important thing in that advocate or that mentor.
Annie?
I think what was just described actually characterizes my biggest advocate perfectly, constantly pushing to do more, constantly seeking out more opportunities for me to either try something new that I haven't done before, or to showcase something that I'm really great at. So my greatest advocate is also my current boss, who is also in the room tonight, so I don't want to flatter him too much. But I will say that all of that really resonates. I think it's been so important for me. Like, his greatest advice to me has been, get out from behind your bunker. He says that to me all the time, and it can be really frustrating when I'm like, what does that mean? Like, how do I do that? But he's been there every step of the way to help me do that and kind of serve up those opportunities to me, because it can be really easy to figure out what you're good at and to want to lean into those things. And if something feels more challenging or feels scary or new, to kind of lean back on those strengths because it's comfortable. But having someone who will constantly push you to step out behind that. And he would say to me, if you're batting 1,000 at the work that you're doing, it's not because you're amazing, it's because you're not pushing yourself hard enough. Like, there should be some failures in there too. So he's just been a wonderful advocate for me and helping me push myself to do more and to be more and to think about what I want to do next.
And I would just add on, which is, if you don't feel like in your current role your manager is an advocate for you, it's really thinking about, is this the right manager for me? Because part of what, for you to grow, you want somebody who's both pushing on you but supporting you, like you were just describing. And so it is finding that right relationship in terms of that. It's a very, very important relationship when, especially if it's your first time managing, you're thinking about your career. I've never stayed in a role very long where I didn't feel like I was learning from my manager, or I didn't feel like I was being pushed by my manager. Like, that was the time to leave either the role or the company. And I really can't stress that strongly enough.
I will say, though, no one's a mind reader.
Right.
And so
you have to give them that feedback.
Yeah, like, pick up your head and don't be afraid to ask for
Absolutely.
some of that broader guidance, and that you're open to it, that you want the feedback. And I feel like sometimes people are waiting for it to be delivered to them, especially early in their career. And I'll tell you, the number of times I've had someone sit down with me one-on-one and say, I want more, I'm interested in this, can you help me get these opportunities? And I light up like a Christmas tree. I'm like, awesome, you want more? I'm happy to advocate. But help yourself out and talk about it. Make it an explicit part of your conversation, so you can just let them know that you are ambitious enough that you want to grow and be pushed.
So that works really well when you have a great manager, which it sounds like all of you have had great managers at various times, and oftentimes the manager-advocate role has intersected to some extent. But what do you do if you have a really crappy manager and that doesn't really like to manage, and you're sort of stuck? Where do you find advocates, or where should you look, and what should you do? Annie, thoughts?
Oh, that's a tough one. I actually, in my previous job, had a manager that I didn't really get along with, and I didn't have the sense that he trusted me and I trusted him, and we were on the same page. And actually, it was really tough for me, and it took me a couple months of trying to work through it and say, is this a reflection on me? Like, what could I be doing differently or be doing better to get beyond this? And I think one of my mentors in that previous life gave me the really great advice that if I need to be specific about the things that I need in order to do my job well, and if I'm not finding that from him, I need to be finding that from others, even in that role, and obviously do the best that you can to change that reality and to be able to move into a different role or onto a different project when you can. But just make sure that you're carving out the things that matter most to you and being very specific about what those things are. Because often it's less an issue of you actually just not liking each other or whatever it is, and it normally comes down to communication. And so I think finding ways to have that more productive conversation can be really helpful.
Did any of you guys have a really bad stinking manager? Just bad? Hands up.
Yeah.
All right.
Not for long.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying.
So did you feel like you were able to impact that change? And how did you do it?
Yeah, I did not get to impact it. It was a temporary thing. It was right around the time you joined Microsoft, actually. And I was with someone who was not that interested in really managing. And part of what I did during that time is I started to reach out across the organization and talk to other people. And it was actually a mutual friend of ours, Kathleen, who was really 2 levels up in a totally different adjacent team. And I just reached out to her and said, I want to do more, I want more. And I think that maybe influenced some changes, but it was done very authentically, not as a power play or anything. I didn't have I was 23, I didn't have any power. But being able to articulate, hey, I want to do more, and I just have a manager who's not pushing me and just doesn't seem that into it. So I think finding other people in the organization who you can relate to, and it's important. I wasn't complaining. I was just trying to figure out what could I do to improve the situation.
I mean, to me, it's like exactly what Sarah said, which is that management is that two-way street. It's like no manager can come and just say, here on a silver platter opportunities for you. But it is your responsibility to be telling your manager, here are the things that are important to me, here's what I want to do, and that should be a two-way dialogue. But there will be a point where you realize that a manager is either, they're not somebody who's focused on making sure that you're learning. And to me, that's the biggest thing, which is, are you in a situation where you can keep learning? And if you're in a situation where you can't keep learning, then it's figuring out is there a place I can keep learning at this company because I value the product this company is doing and the mission of this company, or should I leave? And to me, that you get to that point where you're saying is there a better opportunity? And always, obviously, when in the same, my kind of follow-on to that is when you're interviewing, you should be interviewing the hiring manager as much as they're interviewing you. So it's asking them questions. Is like, can you give me an example of how you help somebody succeed on your team? Can you give me an example of the type of person who doesn't succeed on your team? I mean, those are okay questions for you to be asking when you are walking into the room to interview at that next job, because that hiring manager, that manager relationship is extremely important in any job, as I think we all know.
Yeah.
Does that shift at all when you're at the executive level?
Well,
in terms of, not so much like it's
you're mostly
a two-way
doing
street
managing.
interview, but just you might be in a position where it's like, great, you're hired, please just do your job. And so is there less dialogue when you're in an executive position around how you grow and where you go, or is it the same?
I think it just the feedback comes from different directions, right? It comes from the people who report to you, from your peers on the management team. It might come from a board member.
Right.
And I think you do have to be deliberate about pulling it and letting people know that you are open to it. I think that changes a fair bit.
Anything to add?
I was just going to say, I think it's a mistake to not own your own career and to rely on a manager. It's great when you do have an advocate. It's great when you do have a great manager. But I think just taking ownership over that and finding mentors who can turn into advocates. Because a lot of young women ask me, well, how do I get an advocate? What am I supposed to do? I can't just walk up to someone and say, hey, will you advocate for me? That's so awkward. What if they don't like me? What if they don't know me? And I think finding people you respect to get advice from as mentors first can really help turn other folks other than your manager into advocates. And especially when you don't have a great manager, making sure that you've got that support and advice where you can go to other folks and get that guidance is super important.
I think that's a great point too about managing your own career, because I think even the best mentor or advocate can be saying, I will help give you the opportunities that you want, but I need to know what your goals are, like what you want your career to look like, what you're aspiring to, because only you can know what will truly make you happy and fulfilled at work. Even if they know you really well, it's hard to say, go chase after this opportunity without knowing that that's truly what you want. So just providing that feedback and making yourself think about where you want to be and what you're asking your mentor or sponsor for can be really helpful.
And just to add to that, I would say when you're asking for mentorship, just as you said, you can't just walk up to someone and say, like, will you be my mentor? Like, that just doesn't work. So being very specific about what you're trying to ask from people. So it's like, the more specific your questions are, the more of an interesting and dialogue that you can actually have, which is like, I'm dealing with this very specific issue at work, or I'm debating these two different paths, but the more specific you can be and the more thoughtful you can be walking into that conversation with someone who could be your mentor, that also helps build that relationship, because then it's not just a fluffy conversation, it's like you're actually trying to solve a problem together and you can see how that relationship works.
Sandy, you mentioned this, I guess, a question ago, about your advocate saying, like, if you're not failing some of the time, then you're not trying hard enough. So for all of you, has there been a failure that has been particularly painful, that has shaped what you do and how you do it? And what lessons do you continue to bring forward in your life as a result of that failure? So Lauren, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, no one loves to talk about failure, right? No, but actually, like, I try to embrace that in my regular role, and the things that have really stuck with me as real failures are more around opportunity cost. When I let myself down and I don't go for something or ask for direct feedback or want to know more information because I'm afraid of what the response will be. So there was a point earlier on in my career where I had an opportunity around a really technical role. And someone else who was super technical was slotted into that role instead. And instead of going to the hiring manager and saying, hey, I understand that like someone more technical was the right fit for the role. How far off was I? What are the things that you saw or didn't see? Was this just circumstance? Was it me? Et cetera. I was afraid to hear a no and I wasn't good enough, things like that. And I didn't have that conversation. I didn't get that feedback. And I created a story in my head around that I carried with me. And I think it was an opportunity cost and also a story that didn't necessarily have to be the case, because later I was offered that technical role. But I sort of had this mentality of, I was afraid of hearing no or afraid of the rejection. And I think the opportunity cost, the worst thing that can happen is no. And then you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move on. Big deal. The not knowing or leaving things on the table because you're afraid to ask, that's usually where I feel the biggest sense of failure.
Sarah, you have a fun story for us?
So, for me, I had a pretty public failure with the first company that I helped co-found after I left Benchmark. We basically started a company, got to about 15 million unique visitors in a month, and the three co-founders looked at each other and were like, this isn't working. It's not the big thing that we thought it would be. And we had raised $7 million, had 12 employees, and it was a week before my 40th birthday, so that made it a little bit more stressful. And I was like, and to be honest, I hadn't really failed at anything in my life. And so I like winning. And to sit around and look at each other and say, this isn't working. And potentially turning to your employees and say it's not working. And we offered to give the money back to our investors, and Bill Gurley was like, I invested in the team, get back on the field and see if you can come up with something. And I think for me personally, our approach to building the product was all wrong. We spent almost 2 years in stealth working on this, not getting member feedback, customer feedback. I mean, all things that I had learned at Microsoft 15 years earlier. And we had made the most classic mistakes, and it was pretty public, and it was personal, and it was all consuming. And it was out of that experience that I pretty dramatically changed the way that I think about creating products, bringing them to market, testing them, because I don't want to waste 2 years of my life. And if any of you, if we ever sat down and you're telling me about an idea, I am like, oh my God, don't waste 2 years of your life working on something that you don't get any feedback on. And it was very painful, but it was an incredible learning experience that then led us to eventually the founding of Nextdoor. But personally, that was very public and painful.
Similarly, we started Evite, which, looking 2 decades later is still around as a brand success, but we had to let go 40 people on the team. And there was a newspaper called Fucked Company, which basically announced all the layoffs before anybody had them. And they would get posted somehow on the site.
You did not want to show up on that.
Did not want to show up on that site. So the day we showed up on that site, it was like, we have failed. And the biggest takeaway that I learned from that, and we've really taken it to heart with Gixo, obviously when I was looking at what company to join with SurveyMonkey, and it sounds so obvious, but it was really thinking about your revenue model and what capital you're raising versus what your cost of your business are actually going to be. And 1999 and 2000, all anybody talked about was eyeballs. We want to get eyeballs. Like, it was just basically visitors to the site. And it wasn't, okay, how does that translate into advertising? How does that translate into revenue? And so, we raised $37 million for online invitations, which sounds crazy, and it was crazy. And so we've just taken this time and a much more sensible approach to capital, a much more sensible approach to ensuring that we actually have a revenue model and testing our way into it, exposing it to customers. So everything Sarah's been talking about. And so it's really figuring out, from my perspective, that was also very public. Laying off 40 people there's pretty much nothing tougher than laying off people in your team.
How about you, Annie?
My big failure feels like a softball compared to having to lay off 40 people. So, but felt like a major one for me, and is definitely something that informed everything that I do today and the way that I approach my work today. So for me, I was super fortunate to play on my soccer team in college. And I was really lucky to be recruited to this awesome team where I came from high school, was, big fish in a small pond, but then got to school and was kind of steady middle of the road on my team. And it was hard for me to make that adjustment because I was not used to not winning. I was not used to not being the best. And my defense mechanism or way of coping with that was to have a really bad attitude. I had a bad attitude with my coach. I would blame him or say that if I wasn't playing, it was because we didn't have a great relationship. And I took it out on my teammates and my coach because it was a defense mechanism for what I was actually just quite insecure about, which was my own ability to compete with these Olympians and World Cup players. And so that felt like a failure to me because I know that I was never able to really reach my full potential on that team because I had a bad attitude. But the valuable learning that came out of that was when I then graduated from college and was going into my first job, I thought a lot about that experience and thought I never want my attitude to be the thing that holds me back. So the way that I approach my work now and ever since then has been to say, let me be the one who has the best attitude on the team. I will only let my attitude be a positive, and I won't let it hold me back.
So did you know when you were sort of being bad attitude child that you were very explicitly choosing to have a bad attitude, or did you become subsequently aware that was something you were doing?
Definitely subsequently. I think it's a little hard to be that self-aware.
So how did you become aware of it?
My coach would flag it to me for sure. Your attitude is definitely holding you back, and I'd be like, oh, I don't care. You don't care about me. So I think I've also over time gotten more receptive to feedback, which is also super important. I think a lot of people talk about feedback and say, I want feedback, but then actually when they hear it, it's like, whoa, that's not me, and we'll get really defensive about it. So I think I've both gotten more self-aware just generally, growing helps with that, but then also gotten more receptive to feedback and able to say, when you receive feedback, take a moment, listen to it, engage with it before you respond and get defensive, and you can actually learn quite a bit from it.
That's really great advice. And Sarah, you actually mentioned signal that you're open for feedback, but it is one of those things that we all say oh, I totally want feedback. I'm very open to feedback, but then it is really difficult to actually hear, especially when it's not what we want to hear. So, have you guys developed mechanisms that have been effective for you to even this could hurt? How do you prepare yourself so that you can effectively hear feedback? Because sometimes it comes in ways that we don't expect, and at times we don't expect. It's not always let's sit down and review your performance. Anyone want to take that one?
I think part of it has to be the mindset that you go into it with. So I think one of the things that's been really important for me is just trying to have a growth mindset and understanding that challenges and falters are just part of the process of learning and growing. And I think if I can put myself, even if it's a difficult conversation, like I should have done in the role that I just talked about that was a failure, if I can put this as a learning experience and I'm going into this to learn, it depersonalizes it a little bit, where you don't feel as sensitive. You're like, okay, I want this, I'm ready for this. It's a learning experience. This is going to give me an action plan. I'm a very action-oriented person, so this will give me an action plan of things that I can do and control coming out of it, and then just going in with that kind of mentality has helped me be able to receive feedback.
Sarah?
I think it's still a work in progress, but I do remember I played lacrosse in college, and I remember at one point getting yelled at from like 50-yard line, like 50 yards away, and feeling really down, and one of my teammates pulled me aside and said, well, at least she's still yelling at you. She cares enough to yell at you. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, the worst thing is when they stop talking to you and they've just totally given up on you. And so I think appreciating that it's hard to give feedback, and that if someone is making the effort to give you feedback, they're actually trying to help. And I read something recently that basically said, think about when you're getting the feedback about grading yourself on how well you received the feedback. and that's something new that, because I think there is a natural defense mechanism that definitely comes up, but saying, okay, how am I doing in receiving this? And a lot of that, I think, just comes from not reacting emotionally and trying to force yourself to take that extra breath and listen before you respond. Because for someone to have the courage to give you feedback, it's a gift that they are giving you, that they believe that you can be better.
And I would add on to that is like frequency. So, I mean, obviously we worked at SurveyMonkey, so feedback was a core part of our culture. It meant that as a manager, I mean, every single quarter I was sending out feedback survey to the entire team that worked for me, plus just my direct reports on a very, very regular basis. And if you get in the cadence of constantly receiving feedback and letting people give it to you both anonymously as well as one-on-one, I took every person either one-on-one or one-on-three for lunch within 3 to 6 months after they started, and I always started off and asked them, tell me something you love about SurveyMonkey, to get people sort of warmed up and excited to talk to me. And then I'd always say, tell me something we could be doing better. And so by just making it so frequent in terms of the amount of feedback that I was receiving, you get sort of the thing is like, okay, we're gonna get better. Like, it's that growth mindset of we have to get better. But the more you build that or flex that muscle of receiving feedback, the better you get at it. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna keep getting better. The team's gonna keep getting better. So I'd say just like continuing to figure out how on that regular cadence can I be getting it. And obviously, there's nice products out there to do that.
We won't name them by name. So research does show that sometimes, especially for women in leadership positions, it's difficult to be more emotional, so you'll tend to hide your emotions. And so do you feel like you can't always bring your whole self to work, or do you also feel that you're held to a double standard?
I think the two of us are like on the other end, or at least
So to explain what you mean, Selina.
Well, I've worked with a lot of people. My co-founder now, Al, is a very calm guy. He was my same co-founder from Evite. Dave was the most calm, being. And I'm definitely, a lot more get a lot more excited and passionate, but also, show my frustration. I mean, the thing I have learned over my career is that showing frustration and doesn't actually help that much for anyone, whether you're male or female. And trying to make sure that, because that puts the other person on edge, especially when you're the manager, and that doesn't help too much. But I feel, showing your emotions, whether it's being happy about your kids, whether it's being excited about the project you're working on, disappointed that something didn't ship on time, like that's showing human behavior, and I've never had that be an issue.
Did you ever feel like you had to change or adapt any part of yourself to kind of either fit into a culture or meet people's expectations, or you're like, I am who I am, and it worked out?
I feel like more, fortunately for me, has been more of the latter. I mean, obviously I've learned things over time, like trying to be more patient and think qualities. I didn't, there's a lot of qualities you learn and you grow, but I didn't feel like I couldn't bring myself to work. I don't know.
I think I have a strong personality. I celebrate the highs. I have vented when I'm not happy with things, but I'm also a type of person that if I express it, like, it's done.
Right.
It's over. And I think that what I hear from a lot of people who I work with and people who work for me, they're like, I know where I stand and I know what you're thinking, Sarah. It's not something that is masked and they have to decode it. And that's my personality. And I think I would have a real trouble checking that. And for the most part, it's been very positive because I think people feel like there's an authenticity to my communication. I also think that it is helpful to share your life with people at work. And when I do a one-on-one, I have a very simple format. I talk about the person, the people on the team, the projects that they're working on, and a category I call you. And it may only be a minute, it may be 5 minutes, but I'm like, how are you? And I try and create space where people can tell me, it may be something professionally, but it also might be something personally that they're struggling with. And I want to invite that people can share that with me because it's usually, if it's something big, it's affecting them in their work because we spend a lot of time at work, and I can be a better manager, more empathetic if I understand more of the big picture. And if you do that on a regular basis, then you'll hear about things along the way and be much more attentive to the whole person that you're trying to help be the best they can be at work, but understanding that there's life outside of work.
Did you ever feel like you were held to a double standard in your career so far?
I feel like I've been lucky on that front. I think my strong personality preceded me, and so I think people just realize, well, that's Sarah, and so embrace it.
How about you, Lauren?
If anything, I've had to work on being a little bit more vulnerable. I think it's a two-way street when you're asking someone to share their own personal challenges and life with you when you're managing them. And if you expect to know the full picture, they expect to know the full picture too. It's not like a one-sided relationship. And I grew up on the East Coast. I started my career at the Washington Post. It was very Washington and very hard line between work and life. Maybe you could go to happy hour with your young coworkers after work, but you weren't sharing personal details. You were putting a barrier in between those things. And then coming out to the West Coast, which is a different culture, and then managing a ton of millennials who everyone wants to have this whole work is life is friends kind of relationship. And it can't be one-sided and it's all together. It's one big thing. I've actually had to learn how to open up a little bit based on where, the culture in which I grew up professionally initially after college. And that's been kind of challenging for me on the flip side to try and bring to work.
Did you ever feel like you were held to a double standard?
Not really. I probably haven't reflected enough on it, but no, not too much.
Awesome. How about you, Annie?
Me neither. I think I've been really lucky too. I guess I'm one of those millennials that she speaks of, and I've only ever worked on the West Coast, so I've been really lucky to feel like I've always worked with people who feel like friends, so it hasn't been a struggle to kind of be open and transparent with those people, but I think I'm just really lucky in that regard.
So what is the next seat at the table that you guys are looking at, and what are you doing to get there, Annie?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I do love my current job. Again, my boss is here. I'm not.
He's the greatest, and so is my job.
Never gonna leave. No, but we talk about this a lot, and I think something that I would be really excited to do at some point in the future, perhaps many years away, but would be to kind of run something myself. I think my background is in consulting, and now I'm on this global strategy team at Uber, where it does feel a bit more still like an advisory role. And I'm learning a ton, and I love the exposure both in consulting and now to all different kinds of projects and all different kinds of people. But I do think there's a part of me that feels frustrated often about feeling like I'm not ultimately accountable for the outcomes. And I know that switching to that world would have its own host of frustrations as well and be really challenging, but I think that's something that I would be really excited to see how I operate in that environment, and would be a great learning experience for me.
How about you, Selina?
So I'm a first-time CEO, and we're trying to launch our product in the next 2 weeks. So it's very exciting, and the biggest thing for me is trying to launch a successful product, build a successful business. We're trying to Our product is live fitness classes, and we're trying to make a huge social impact on people's activity rates. And so that's kind of our mission and our goal.
Lauren?
I took on the global leadership role of the team in January, so still newish to running a global team, a bigger team, and definitely enjoying that experience. But I think, kind of after I'm done garnering the lessons from this kind of leadership phase, I do want to go build something again. I helped build the sales solutions business at LinkedIn, and I love to build things. I just love getting my hands on building and shaping something. So I'd probably love to build a product team doing data products and build a business.
Does that mean like inside a larger company or outside or either or?
I got to do it in a larger company, and let me tell you, that's kind of nice sometimes because there's a lot more resources than you would have in a startup situation. So you can draw from experience and resources, so that was nice. But I also think it's fun to be really scrappy and have no roles. So I think I would like that too.
How about you, Sarah?
So I feel like I'm in this incredible opportunity to build a great company. And you can spend your entire career looking for that. And I was lucky enough to have been at a great company like Microsoft early on. And I thought, gee, how do you go and think about creating your own version of that? And I feel very lucky that we have the opportunity to do that. And on a personal note, I don't think that there have been enough successful female founders of consumer internet companies. And I'd like to do it for the team. I'd like to do it for myself. I'd like to also be an example that people can look at and hopefully be able to share that experience. And hopefully young women out there can look at it and like, look, so-and-so did it, I could go do it. Because I truly believe that it helps for people to see others be successful and gain a little bit of that confidence that I can go do that. Look, there's someone who I relate to who has done it. And I feel like we have a unique opportunity to do that at Nextdoor.
And you, as its co-founder, which is awesome. So before we get to the Q&A of everybody, we're just going to do a quick little speed round just for some fun. And we're just going to go up and down the line. So what's your favorite word?
Trust.
Resilience.
Winning.
Joy.
What's your least favorite word, Selina?
Hate.
Never.
Can't.
Turnt. Slang that I don't understand.
Good one. I don't think I know what that means. What's your favorite curse word, Annie?
Shit.
I feel bad saying this in front of you guys. It starts with an F.
Oh, come on.
Fuck.
I got permission from her dad, so motherfucker. Said with emphasis.
I asked my team, and they said, shit, 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 3 times.
What profession other than your own would you like to try, Selina?
If I wasn't tone deaf, I'd love to be a professional musician.
I would probably be a coach or a teacher.
I too would love to be a singer-songwriter, professional musician.
I think an executive coach would be really cool. I'd see a lot of stuff.
What profession would you most not want to do?
We were talking about this one earlier. I think having to be a marketer for cigarettes would be my least hard.
For me, my husband was just here a little while ago. Chef, I think, would be my least favorite profession. I'm a terrible cook, and he can confirm later for you guys.
I'm really bad at languages. Translator. I think I would just freeze.
It's funny we're all picking stuff we're terrible at. I'm a terrible driver, and so it was like anything in that.
No Uber driving in your future.
Come on.
And what's your favorite way to de-stress?
Play with my kids.
Anything outside, playing golf with friends, anything that just gets you to the point where you're not thinking about the day-to-day and you're just very in the moment.
Definitely outside. I would say hiking in the mountains with my family.
Totally agree. Anything outside, exercise, hiking, backpacking, running, all of it.
Awesome. All right, this is where we turn it over to you. If you have questions for our panelists, we have Tom, and is John out there? Oh, and Mike with microphones. Question right here.
I don't know if this is much of a question as a challenge. Something that you all were speaking about was the fact that in order to we should take control of our own careers. And I find that a challenging statement. I've heard it before, not just from you, because it doesn't acknowledge the fact that part of the reason why we lack so much diversity in our industry is that underrepresented groups often feel like they can't do that. And it could be a cultural reason, but it is a very kind of bias-laden thing to expect that all people will be able to take control or advocate for themselves. So I would like to say to the leaders in the audience that the other side of that is actually actively finding those people,
Right.
being open to someone just walking up to you and awkwardly saying, will you mentor me? Like, I think that's fine. But also, like, using some of the advantages that we've garnered, making it as far as we've made it in our careers to help lift up those groups as well.
Absolutely.
One quick comment on that. One of the things that I've started to really think a lot about, and big thanks to someone at LinkedIn called Pat Waters. She's our head of,
Awesome.
she's amazing. Watch stuff or read stuff from her if you guys get a chance. She's really inspiring. And she has made the topic of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And the inclusion and belonging piece resonates so incredibly deeply with me. When you think about being comfortable to be yourself and bring your best self to work and creating an environment around that, I focus a lot on introverts in my team because we've got about a half and half split, and how do you create a meeting environment that's comfortable for introverts? So I appreciate you throwing down that challenge. I think creating a culture of inclusion and belonging where people of lots of different backgrounds and types can feel comfortable is at least a step in the right direction, and I absolutely agree that we should be advocating and finding those folks.
We actually use the language inclusion at Gaku as well for the same reason, but I recognize that it's not as familiar with everybody, which is why I felt that way.
So we had almost 50%, maybe 40% of the group stood up for introverts. So what do you do to bring introverts in? Since they might not be asking this question.
So one of the things that we do for meetings is we always do pre-reads so that folks have time to digest the information that's going to be presented before the actual discussion, so that they can prepare comments in advance and aren't necessarily always drowned out by the person who thinks fast on their feet and can make really quick comments. Another thing that introverts, like, I shouldn't make a blanket statement, but have communicated they don't really love is being put on the spot. So inviting someone to speak or give feedback after the fact in an environment that they're comfortable with, but still making sure that you're collecting that and that their voice is heard because you are aware of their preferences is another thing that we do as part of our team culture.
Great advice. Other question over here.
Hi, I've heard the word lucky a lot, and I'd like to uncover more, I'd like to hear more. And in particular, I'd like to address work-life balance with those of you who might have children, and not only how you achieve that and have achieved that with a roadmap of your career, but how you in turn provide that.
Sure. I think I'll start. So for me, there's a few important things that I try to do. I always try to decide what are the important things that I'm not going to be flexible on with my family. And so, you know, people have different views on that. For me, as an example, I don't love eating dinner with my kids. They're like 4 and 7, and there's food in lots of different places. And so when I come home, they're like bathed and fed, but I have from 6 to 7:30 every night where we play. And like, to me, that time is absolutely precious. I'll only do one evening event a week maximum because I don't want to give away that flexibility of that time with my kids. And so it's setting those boundaries and deciding what those, I have another friend who feels like driving her kids to school is a thing she loves, and so she does that. And so it's figuring out what are those things that you're not going to be flexible on. On weekends, it's the same. It's like we make a decision of like, what are the times during the day that I'm just literally going to not put my phone on. Dave Goldberg, when I learned how to be a parent with him, and he left work every day at 5:55 to go have dinner with his kids. And that was something that he said is like, nothing for those 2 hours, nothing's going to happen that can't happen later. And so I don't, unless the site was down, I won't even answer like my phone at all. I won't look at my phone. And like, it's just making and setting that expectation. So with my team, I was on the 5:43 train every single day. Everybody knew it. And so for me, it's deciding what are those things I'm going to be inflexible on, and then being flexible on pretty much everything else, and setting what those boundaries are and what those qualities or what those things that are really important to you. And so, and on the vice versa side, it's setting the expectations with my kid. Like today, I told him, I said, I'm going to be late tonight. Like, and it's making sure that you're setting the expectations on both sides, and then the most important thing for me is just like not feeling guilty. And that sounds easier said than done, but it's like when I'm at work, I'm focused on work, I'm excited to be at work. And I remember one day my preschool daughter asking me, she said, how come, and she's now 7, but how come you're one of the mommies who doesn't pick me up? And I said, you know what? I said, I love going to work. I was like, and I do, I love going to work. I said, I love you more than work, but I love going to work. And for me, it's important to do both of those things. And like, that is, I don't want to be shy about the fact that I love my job, that I love going to work, and I want her to know that. But at the same time, it's like, you know, obviously, when I'm with them, I want to be with them. And so to me, like that, and I was very specific around being a mom and balancing those things. And it's being willing to ask for things too. Like I did a couple parent-teacher conferences on Skype. It's like, I mean, when you're talking about a 2-year-old and did they play, like, it's like, I mean, I can hear that on Skype, you know? And it's like, so it's figuring out what are those different things, but like, that's where I feel like it was like that you can't, as much as you can, not feeling guilty, and when you're in the moment of whatever you're doing, when you're at work, be all there. When you're at home, be all there. And my dad signs his emails, every of his emails, with wherever you are, be all there. And that to me is like a huge thing.
Very cool. So I'll chime in just on a little thing. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I will say that work-life balance is very personal. We tend to talk about it as if it is this like defined ideal that all of us are moving toward or away from. And it is, you'll have to decide for yourself what work-life balance looks like. And it should be different for each person. And it is a reflection of the partner that you're with and what your life is. And it will shift and change as your kids shift and change as well. So know that it's dynamic. Know that it's okay to change your mind about what balance looks like today versus what it's going to look like maybe even 6 months from now. And ask for help. I know I hated like bringing in extra help to do laundry or automating all of my shopping. It's like I used to love doing grocery shopping, but you have to decide what the important things are for you and not be afraid to ask for help or boundaries when you need them. There was another question that was, yes.
Hi. I wanted to also dig into her question, the first part of it, the lucky part. So I'm I don't know how you say it, an intersectional person of intersectionality. I'm African American and a woman who works at a high-tech company. And how do you create your own luck? All of you have said multiple times that you're lucky, and I've had to work really, really hard. And I'm not saying that like, everyone has to work really hard, but what is that missing piece?
Sure. So I love the line, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I believe it, right? I think you create your work, you create your good luck from your hard work. And there's a couple things that come up for me, especially if you're going on an entrepreneurial journey. And they're related. And one is about choosing the people who you are going to go on that journey with. I've been working with my business partner off and on for like 17 years, right? My other business partner, it's been 11 years, right? I know what it's like to be in the bunker with those guys and face the hard decisions like shutting down our first company and pivoting. And I think the second piece of it that is important in terms of luck is resilience and sticking with something. I think a lot of people in the entrepreneurial journey, they hit a wall and they give up. And I think finding ways that you can stick with it, picking something you're really excited and passionate about, having people on the team that you look forward to going to work with and know that when things get rough, they're not going to head for the hills. You got to enjoy the day-to-day of it. All those things allow you to stick with it when you hit the bumps in the road, and there will be bumps in the road. And I think a lot of people, when they hit them, they give up. And so I think a lot of being lucky is setting yourself up that you're going to be able to withstand the turbulence, if you will, when other people will opt out. And I think that starts with picking the people who you are going to be on that plane with, so to speak.
And the only thing I would add to that, I mean, I would say people is like absolutely the number one most important thing in terms of picking and thinking about where you're working, who you're working with. The second thing, just to add to that, is I also feel like is that something in the Valley that's really important is data. And you know, when you're thinking about like putting that extra effort into understanding the business, understanding the data, and understand what's going on, it's very hard when you're in that discussion, and it was that point of being able to express your opinion and have that opinion, you can more confidently express your opinion when you actually know the numbers. And so one of the things I feel like people underestimate when they're thinking about like, you know, how do they become better is actually taking more time with the data and the numbers and learning that side of the business really well in whatever you're doing, because that becomes a confidence builder to be able to speak your voice, have that discussion and be listened to that you can't argue with. And I feel like that finding companies that value a culture where that's valued is also important, but I do think that and you know, data is an example to me of knowledge, but it's like it does take that working that extra hard to learn and make sure that when you're able to express yourself and you're expressing yourself with just a little bit more information.
Anna, you're still earlier in your career. How do you feel like you make your luck?
I think you just try and put yourself in situations where you are more likely to be lucky. So I think it gets to a lot of what they were saying about surrounding yourself with people who you know will lift you up or give you the opportunities that you need or what have you, but really just thinking about how can I maximize my potential of being in the place that I can feel like I'm going to get lucky.
And I'll add one more thing, like being open to feedback and asking for it. That can do so much for you, because if you're not feeling like you're getting the luck, just asking, what can I be doing differently? What can I be doing better? Because getting that feedback loop will help you understand the gap between perhaps what you think you're doing and how it's being perceived. So here's a question from Twitter. How will we help women returning back to the workforce get into leadership positions for whatever reason they might have stepped back or stepped out of? Lauren, your eyes got really big.
Such a great question. I actually spoke like a year ago at a workshop around this particular topic. And my own mother left the workforce when I was, I think, 2, and then tried to go back 15 years later when I was in high school. And she had an advanced degree, incredibly smart woman, very professionally successful before she left. And it was super hard. And I watched that struggle. I mean, like, you know, she was doing all kinds of random tasks and like odd jobs and other things to try and build back her credibility. And I don't know that I have a perfect answer, but I definitely think that it is such an incredibly important topic for all of us as women to invest in. I'm not there at the point where I've taken a break from my career, but I may be someday. And I think, you know, some of the things I've heard is keeping one foot in the door.
Absolutely.
Or, you know, just doing certain things that keep your skills up or your confidence even, just so that you can come back. That's definitely something that I've heard can be helpful.
I mean, if you think about, especially in our environment, when you're thinking about technology, if you think about 5 years ago, like Facebook didn't even exist the same way as a marketing channel, and now it's whatever, like 50-60% of all media spend online. And so the world is moving so fast. I mean, there's nothing wrong with obviously taking time out for whatever reason, especially if you have to, but it's thinking about what are those ways I can stay engaged? What are those ways that I can continue my learning journey as I am doing whatever I need to do, whether that's consulting, whether that's continuing up education, learning. I mean, there's so many different things to do, but I feel stepping completely out makes it extremely hard to come back in a world where technology is moving this fast.
I have a lot of friends from Harvard Business School, women who stepped out and are now at a point where they want to give back, and they stepped completely out. And I definitely think if you asked them, they would say it would have been great to have stayed involved as an advisor, as a consultant, something. But what I've seen where it's been successful is when they basically go in and they say, give me an opportunity. I'm gonna show you what I can do, and basically betting on themselves and being very clear, hey, I don't need to come in at some high level title. What matters to me is that I'm back in the game and I'm contributing, and so let me come in, and if I can prove to you that I can do this, then I'd want to move along more quickly, and I've seen that work well. It's obviously a bet on yourself, and having that open conversation from the beginning with the hiring manager to say, I'm probably going to get a deal in hiring this person because they're really good, but if they succeed, I want to be able to move them along and put them in higher positions faster.
The other thing I'll add to that is show evidence of how you stay curious. Because you don't always have to be in a job to show that you are learning and that you are curious about the world and that you have that growth mindset. And ultimately, what a manager is looking at that's going to take a chance on you is you might not have the skill that I think I'm looking for, but gosh, you have a lot of initiative and you're staying curious and you're staying engaged, which means you're going to learn fast. And that's ultimately what any manager wants to see, is someone that learns fast. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and first of all, give an enormous round of applause to our awesome panelists. And do a couple of things. First is just to say that everyone, when you arrived, you had one of these postcards on your seat. And this is about, today is hopefully not just a one-time event, that it is a series, maybe the first of a series of small steps that all of us will collectively take together to take action and help be part of this change. And so you'll have a little column here, which is, what are some things that I might do differently? Like, will I send an agenda in advance so someone quiet can think about how they're going to respond in a meeting? Or what will I do to advocate for someone? Or think about someone that advocated for me and behaved differently as a result of that. So that's the second column. Think through advocacy and what that means for you. And that last column is really about sharing the data. I was actually surprised when we sometimes got some email about these events, and I would say that based on the email, I'm guessing that these people were younger in their career because they said, I don't think there's a problem. I don't see what you're talking about. But the fact is, and this is where the data is king, from that first rung of management, on every subsequent level of management post that women keep falling further and further behind, and especially people of color also likewise fall behind. And so these are things that we will have to actively be aware of, raise awareness of, and fight for the diversity that all of us will benefit tremendously of. I mean, Sarah was telling the story of when you're sitting there discussing a feature set, people are going to have different perspectives, and that's really important to have those different perspectives in the room. So also in the same vein as this, I want to shine a really bright light on the people that made this event possible. And Rachel, where are you? Rachel Kwan made this event happen. When we were struggling to find that new, bigger venue, she did everything she could to make sure you guys could all sit here and be a part of this conversation. And then since we've had so much of a conversation about advocates, I also want to recognize the whole Costanoa team. You guys are incredibly supportive, and you are mostly guys, but thank you so much for always being there and supporting us in this, so thank you. And I want to do a special shout out to someone who's been an advocate of mine for over 20 years. He is my boss. He is the founder of Costanoa, and when I brought this idea up to the whole team, he said, yes, absolutely, let's do it. It's really important. Can't wait to be part of that conversation. So Greg, come on up here and thank you.
Thank you all for coming. We're honored and pleased to have you all here. I can't get up here without saying thanks again to our amazing panel. We're really appreciative of your taking the time and sharing your wisdom and insight. There really is not a lot to say other than we have to be talking about it and we have to be working on it, and none of us are perfect, and we're just trying to take one step after another. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Martina for her leadership. I would also be remiss if I didn't note that 4 people, but many of whom Returning to the Workforce Path Forward is an organization that actually spun out of one of our portfolio companies and is now a nonprofit that we sponsor. And there are many women in the audience who have actually been doing returnships at companies, including a couple of Costanoa portfolio companies, Demand-Based Mid-Tech. So we are really pleased to have started the conversation. There's actually much more conversation and a lot more action to happen, but thank you, and we look forward to talking and working with you all.
And just a real quick thing, Greg gets to pick the lucky winners. So we're all going out to dinner afterwards to hang out and celebrate and advocate for each other and shine a light on each other. And we're going to pick 2 people who actually put their names in for the drawing to join us for dinner afterwards.
Really, do I have to get Madhu? This looks, okay, Madhu?
Madhu.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Noreen Helvey.
Noreen? Excellent.
Okay.
All right, come join us for dinner. All right, so Noreen, afterwards, just come join us up on stage. You're going to join us for dinner. Thank you guys all so much for coming. One last thing about Greg saying this is the beginning of the conversation. We hope to have more of these events. We've actually already planned to have our next one in New York together with Lean In this fall. We'll keep you on all of our mailing lists, but again, take your own action, think about what you're going to do in your own personal life, and let's create this change together. So thank you.